Welcome to The Alcove. I'm Mark Malero. My guest today is the world mysticism author Timothy Freke. His previous books include the controversial best-selling book, The Jesus Mysteries. His new book is entitled The Gospel of the Second Coming, co-authored, as with most of Timothy's books, along with Peter Gandy. Pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome.
It's a delight to be here, Mark.
Yeah. Now, I'm wondering if you could first of all just kind of introduce me to your general area of research. I know that you're an expert on Gnosticism. What is kind of what you would consider your expertise in that subject?
Well, I'm a philosopher, really, and my particular interest is in the area of philosophy that gets called the perennial philosophy, or sometimes mysticism, or specifically Gnosticism. Mm-hmm. And the books that I've become best known for are books on Christian Gnosticism, starting with the one you mentioned, The Jesus Mysteries.
Right.
We followed that up with another one called Jesus and the Lost Goddess. Finally, The Laughing Jesus.
That's right.
And now what we think of as the fourth in the trilogy, The Gospel of the Second Coming.
Okay. And with this new book, I know there's a lot of satire here. There's been comparisons to George Orwell with Animal Farm. I wonder if you could tell me about the approach that you have to this book. What is it that you're trying to communicate with it?
Yes, we have a delightful introduction to the book by Professor Faye Kinnett from the Immaculata College of Feminist Theology in Texas,
okay,
who compares the book and says that she thinks it will do what Animal Farm did for communism, it will do for Christianity. And I think that might be fair. What we've done with this book is, you see, the other books we've done, the first three, these are serious scholarly books. There's big wadges of footnotes in the back. And it's because we're addressing very controversial areas. And both Peter and I have gone into great depth of research with this for 2 decades. Mm-hmm. And these books are now taught at some universities, and they're part of a revisionist history of Christianity, a new approach. What we've done with our latest book is to say, look, we need to find a way of getting this information out, which is open to many more people, and which is fun. So what we've done is, rather than write a book about Gnosticism, we've written a Gnostic book.
Okay.
So that's what this latest book is. It's a satirical gospel, but like all true satire, whilst it's a very funny book,
yes,
its purpose is also deadly serious.
Okay.
So it's a combination of those two.
And so what is its purpose?
The deadly serious purpose,
yes,
on top of the sheer fun.
Absolutely.
The purpose really is to convey two things. One is what we take to be the accurate history of Christianity. Our thesis, which sounds shocking to people at first, but really is based on hard evidence, is Jesus isn't an historical figure. That story of a man who's born of a virgin, walks on water and comes back from the dead, it sounds too good to be true, and it is too good to be true. It's a myth. It's a very powerful allegory. It's, the Jesus story is full of little parables, isn't it?
Yeah.
And they're teaching stories. They convey spiritual truths, deep ones, but they're not meant to be taken literally. There wasn't literally a Good Samaritan. It's a story.
But you are essentially saying, because this is very controversial, of course, you're saying there was literally no historical Jesus.
We're saying the whole Jesus story is like the parables.
Okay.
It's one big parable.
His life was a parable.
The whole thing is is an allegorical myth, a parable created by Christians called Gnostics, which means knowers.
Right.
They're called Gnostics because they're interested in something called gnosis, which is a mystical state of awakening, means knowledge. It's self-knowledge.
Personal insight.
Knowing deeply who you are, beyond the personal, actually. It's impersonal enlightenment, if you like.
Okay.
And the Jesus story is an allegory containing the teachings which can lead to this state of gnosis.
Now, I'm curious about the idea of influence on this, because if you think of somebody like Joseph Campbell, he made the idea that, mythology, these kinds of stories, again, are not meant to be taken literally, that it's essentially metaphor, that it's allegory. And are you making kind of a similar argument to say that we need to get rid of the dogma, the orthodoxy? There's an idea of spirituality there, but we don't need the perhaps ultra-orthodox way of looking at it, the traditional way of looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. What Campbell did, and he was a genius, and a really, really awake man. I mean, a beautiful man as well. And what he saw, he said that religion is literalized mythology, and that's what the traditional authoritarian dogmatic Christian religion is.
Right.
It's taken this myth and made it about history. It's literalized it. Of course, you've only got to look at it and read it to go, hang on a minute, people aren't born of virgins, they don't walk on water, and they don't come back from the dead. But these all have allegorical meaning. And the really interesting thing, Mark, and this is the center of our work, really, is not only is it a myth, it's a pagan myth.
A pagan myth.
This story had been around for hundreds, probably thousands of years. If you go back to ancient Egypt, they had the figure of the dying and resurrecting god-man Osiris. Mm-hmm. In Greece, he becomes Dionysus. In Persia, he's Mithras. Elsewhere, he's Serapis, Adonis, Attis. Mm-hmm. And amongst a small group of expat Jews living in Alexandria, Jews who speak Greek, thinking Greek, writing Greek, and who are immersed in Greek philosophy, they write this story of Joshua, which in Greek is Jesus,
right,
who is the same figure. And all the elements, and this is quite extraordinary, but true, all the elements that make up the Jesus story, right from the virgin birth, through being born in front of shepherds in a cave or a stable, changing water into wine at a wedding, having 12 disciples, bringing a religion of love, initiating baptism, dying at Easter, sometimes through crucifixion, so coming back after 3 days, taking bread and wine to commune with, all of that is pagan.
And you're saying that's standard pagan mythology?
All of those elements exist within these pagan stories of the dying and resurrecting God-man. It's not that there's any one story which is identical to the Jesus story. It's a bit like, if you took The Matrix today, which is an allegorical film.
Sure, absolutely.
If you were an expert on science fiction, I'm sure you could go, oh, look, they took that from there, and they took that from there, and they combined it to make a new story.
Right, exactly.
That's what was being done by mythologists in the ancient world. They were creative geniuses. And they would take various elements from various myths and wheel together a new myth, and that's what the Jesus myth is.
Okay, and I'm wondering, how is your work viewed within, let's say, the Gnostic scholarship community? If you take somebody like Elaine Pagel's, the Gnostic Gospels, a lot of that scholarship has come out, a lot of it has been accepted. Is your work considered mainstream within that community, or are you controversial within that community? I'm curious.
What we're saying is becoming more and more the viewpoint in academia. There's no two ways about that.
Okay.
What's happening is that academia, by its very nature, the reason that Peter and I, we're not institutionalists, and that's why we don't work within institutions, because they're so conservative. It has been accepted for so long that there must be an historical Jesus, that those of us, and there's many now, who are challenging that, are still the radical wing. There's no two ways about that.
You're still on the fringe.
However,
yeah,
more and more scholars are kind of coming out of the closet on this and going, actually, it looks more and more like, there's no historical evidence for a man. It's identical to these pagan myths. And the Gnostic Christians, who in my view are the original Christians, although they're treated normally as kind of strange heretics,
right.
I think they're the original Christians, and their great heresy is that Jesus didn't come in the flesh. Jesus represents you. He is you, and they accept that it's similar to the God-man. They call him in one of the pagan God-man, they call him in one of their texts many-faced Attis. That's Jesus is many-faced Attis.
Okay.
So they have an approach which Joseph Campbell would recognize immediately. This is an archetypal figure. He's an everyman figure.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that think, isn't it that the Buddha is sort of representative of an inner self-realization, but that Christ was sort of an outer
exactly,
realization.
And it's not like that. Take a very early Gnostic, a very misunderstood man like Paul, who is the great hero of the Gnostics. There's two Pauls. There's a fake Paul who arrives in the 2nd century, who's anti-Gnostic, creation of the Roman Church. And there's the authentic letters of Paul, which are totally Gnostic. And Paul is very clear that Jesus is a being of light, which you have a mystical experience of,
right,
and you discover the Christ within you.
Yeah, that's a very Gnostic idea.
That's what the message is. It's all about finding out that you're the Christ. And what they mean by the Christ is the same as the Buddhists mean by the Buddha nature, or the Hindus mean by the Atman.
Right.
That there's one awareness within which all this is arising. So, although we're here, Tim and Mark, having this conversation,
right,
if we come back deeper into our being, there's actually one of us meeting itself in another form. And that's the gnosis.
Wow. Now it's interesting because, again, these are very new ideas to most people in the Western world, most people that are brought up in traditional notions of Christianity and other religions. Your work is considered controversial. What have been some of the reactions to your new book from just lay people, from scholars, from people within the Gnostic community? Because there must be people that argue against these ideas, even though you personally clearly believe them and expound them. There must be people that when they hear there was no historical Jesus, people feel that's heresy or blasphemy, obviously.
Well, the reaction overwhelmingly to our new book has been, oh my God, it's so funny.
Right, right.
Because it is a lot of fun. The subtitle is Jesus is back, and this time he's funny. Because we've written a kind of new improved testament,
Okay.
in which Jesus gets to come back and put right all the confusions since last time. So Jesus himself can explain the real history of Christianity, the real meaning of the Jesus myth, and Jesus himself can take you into this gnosis.
Yes.
And by some amazing coincidence, Jesus' theories turn out to be very similar to my own.
But it's interesting, though, because, again, when you take the idea of writing a new gospel, so to speak, Gnostic or otherwise, a lot of people would be, I mean, let's be honest, a lot of people would be offended by that. What do you say to those people? Because, again, there are people that, you know, they have their traditional beliefs, they want them respected, and you are offering a different way of looking at it. But what is that like, that synthesis between you and them? Because I would imagine you must have some arguments with people. There must be people that you're not hostile to, but maybe they come to you and say, this is ridiculous. What are you writing about?
Well, we haven't had any death threats.
That's good.
But we've had plenty of after-death threats. You know, there's a little place in hell where Peter and I are going to have nasty things done to us forever.
Right.
By a God of love, apparently.
Right.
Overwhelmingly, you know, we get support, partly because, you know, our message is not anti-Christian. We want to bring Christianity back to life. And see, once you see that the dying, resurrecting God-man, whether you call him Osiris or Dionysus or Jesus, is a mythical figure, then you see you have to keep reinventing him, because otherwise the myth ceases to convey the gnosis. It has to keep it fresh. That's what people did 2,000 years ago. That's what we're doing now.
Right.
And I think when people start to get a feel for what we're talking about, which is a state of oneness and love, then it kind of undercuts that hostility. And so overwhelmingly, the response we get is positive, which is often a surprise to people, because they think, oh my God, you're going to, you know. And of course, not wholly. Like I said, we do get people who don't like it. But when they look at actually read the books, I think that's what changes it. And sorry, Mark.
Oh no, that's okay. But the people that don't like it, for instance, what do they say to you? Because I'm trying to think of it from their point of view.
The objections?
Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
the key objections usually are, look, there's. I mean, you hear it said. I don't know the first person who said it, but you hear this thing. Oh, there's more evidence for Jesus than there is for Julius Caesar, and crazy things like this. None of which is true. There is no evidence for an historical Jesus. You've got the Gospels, which are faith documents and are created over time. They're not eyewitness accounts of anything.
Okay.
You then have got to put them in the context of all the other Gospels we now have, the Gnostic Gospels, which are clearly mythological or wisdom sayings. So there's no basis for an historical man there.
But are there historians, though, that would disagree with you, though, that aren't, let's say, religiously inclined, that just believe that there was a person named Jesus at that time, whether or not that was a Messiah or not? That there might have been a
kind of like a
carpenter's
black hole. Albert Schweitzer, who did all of this years before us and came to the conclusion there was no historical Jesus, said it was like looking into a well. You just saw, there was nothing there, so you just saw your own face reflected back. And, you know, it's like that. Everyone has their own Jesus. You know, Buddhists have a Buddha Jesus. Hindus have an avatar Jesus. Jews have a rabbi Jesus. Nice liberal pacifists have a nice liberal pacifist Jesus. Fundamentalists have a fire and brimstone Jesus. And the thing is, Mark, you know, really, if there was an historical Jesus, then most of them are wrong. And one or two people may be right.
Right, so there's all these versions, they can't all be right.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying. Okay.
So what I say to people, really, when they want to hang on to this historical Jesus is, well, please at least face the reality that your Jesus probably isn't the right one, and that you've been relating to a fantasy anyway, which is a terrible thing to think. But that's the truth. You know, he can't be all of these things. Some people think he was a spaceman. As you know, some people, Dan Brown thinks he had kids and lived in... There are so many Jesuses.
Right.
So what I love about the mythic approach is actually it's a liberation from that, because once you see as Joseph Campbell would say, that he is a mask of God, that he's a image through whom you can relate to the great mystery of existence, whatever you call that.
Yeah.
You should have your own Jesus. And Tim's Jesus should be different to Mark's Jesus, because he is an expression of your own deeper nature. So the fact that we're all relating different ones is just fine.
So it's a projection.
So indeed. And
Yeah.
so ironically, the Gnostic approach allows people to keep their Jesus. And when pushed, most Christians will say to me, I go, why? Because most people haven't looked into history. If they did, they'd find there was none. But they just go, look, I know there's a Jesus because I relate to him in my heart. I know him by myself. And that's actually a profound Gnostic sentiment.
Because it's personal.
It's personal.
Yeah.
It says nothing about history. You can't judge history based on what you feel in your heart.
Yeah.
But you can judge your spirituality in that way, and should.
Now, it's interesting, getting away from the book a little bit, you mention, you say that you are asleep and dreaming. Wake up. Life is not what it seems. You are not who you think you are. What is your spiritual mission when you say that? Because it seems that you're making an appeal to regular people, even outside of, let's say, what you're writing. You're just trying to appeal to people with a spiritual message. What is that message?
Well, my main passion, my real passion is not history. It's kind of something we've done, but my passion is philosophy, and it's this philosophy of gnosis, or waking up. Mm-hmm. And what I've done specifically in my little book, Lucid Living, which has got this great subtitle, it's called A Book You Can Read in an Hour, that will turn your world inside out. And it's a very short little book,
okay,
designed to encapsulate the essence of these ideas in a way that aren't religious, aren't really spiritual. They're just about, hey, what's this? What's this moment now we're experiencing? And how can we see into what we really are? And what I suggest is that, and this is based on what human beings have said for thousands of years, it's nothing new, but hopefully it's a new way of saying it, is that there's a state which often gets called waking up, but it's like lucid dreaming. Except now, that's why I call it lucid living.
Yeah.
So that you see that, in a lucid dream, well, in a normal dream, you're unconscious, aren't you? You think the dream's real,
Yeah.
you think you are who you appear to be in the dream.
And you're in the moment, you
And
can't
you're
get
there.
outside of the
You're
moment.
kind of there.
Yeah.
And if you dream lucidly, you dream consciously. And you recognize then that really, although you're appearing to be this person in the dream, really, that's not all that you are, because you're the dreamer. You're the awareness within which the whole dream is arising. And in that sense, you are everyone and everything.
So you're not just a character in the play, you're
The whole
directing
thing.
it in a
Exactly.
sense.
You're the author, as we say in the Gospel of the Second Coming.
Right.
It's these ancient teachings, it's the same now. It really is. And if we look, I think it's quite easy to see it in a way which most people are surprised by. That right now, this moment is also arising within one awareness. And when we see that, it's like lucid dreaming, except it's now, that there's this one mind, if you like, within which everything is being created or imagined or dreamed. And we're in this dream, and when
Yes.
we're lost in it unconsciously, we don't see that. But if we wake up, if we pay attention to what we are, then, there's this surprise waiting for us.
Yeah, I was curious as well, who have been some other big influences in your spiritual life? I know Alan Watts was a big influence. Was there any particular author or even kind of moment in your life that led you to where you're at now in terms of your own awakening?
Really, Mark, it's kind of started before I'd had any influences. For me, it started spontaneously when I was 12 years old. I used to feel that the whole of the adult world was entering into some sort of conspiracy, where everyone was pretending that they understood what was going on, they knew what life was, and nobody did. And that's my general experience still. Everyone's busily pretending they know who they are and what's going on.
Personas.
But actually,
yeah.
nobody really does know what's going on. It's incredibly mysterious. And one day when I was sitting on this hill thinking about these things as a kid, something happened. The world kind of turned inside out, and I was this big empty space, and there was all this love, this huge, all-embracing oneness and love. And I knew something very significant had happened. I don't know how long it lasted, probably not very long, I can't really remember.
Right.
I came down from the hill and carried on being an average teenager, I'm sure. But I knew that I was looking to understand that and to refine that. And have spent the rest of my life, one way or other, looking for what that experience and to enter it again and to find ways of helping other people to enter into it, because it transforms life so profoundly in a positive way.
And do you feel that you're getting there? Because again, when you talk about the spiritual idea that there's sort of this ever-present now, so you're not necessarily even actually going anywhere, but there's this idea of consciousness, as you say. How do you, when you talk about something that is so mysterious, how do you kind of have a self-knowing yourself that you're sort of on the bar or off the bar? How do you develop that? Because again, somebody watching this, there's a lot of people that are very interested in Eastern ideas.
Yes.
But it's a very complex thing. There's a lot of simple spiritual messages there, but for a lot of people, they don't know how to enter into that. And so, what would be your advice to somebody that is conscious of some kind of mystery in their life, but they don't know how to go about entering into it in sort of a deeper way?
Well, that's what motivates me to write these books. Whether it's the little Lucid Living book or indeed the Gospel of the Second Coming. That just to enlarge on that allegory just for a second before I come back to your question,
Sure.
because it will help people to understand what that book's really about.
Sure.
Is that here's a book in which Jesus himself is saying, look, I don't really exist. I'm a character in a story. And talking to his disciples and saying, you don't really exist either. Your character's in the story. And when I'm speaking, it's really the author speaking. Everything is happening in the mind of the author. And his purpose, of course, is to convey to the reader that the true is the same is true for them. That we are like characters in this story of life. And there's one author, there's one imagination within which that's arising. And the purpose is to convey that. Now, actually, that's a big but very simple idea. And the most important thing in my experience when I'm talking to people is that people need to get their bullshit detectors on. Because in spirituality, you're wading neck deep in bullshit. And look for what's real. And for me, the touchstone is, do I know this myself? Can I see this myself? And if I can't, then I need to tell people that. And if I can, then I can tell people that.
Is that largely an intuitive process?
It's about, well, for me, it's been about investigating the nature of the moment and actually paying it attention. Seeing, for instance, if I look right now and saying, look, just like in a dream, I've got two natures right now. I'm an object and I'm a subject.
Right.
Here's the object, nice and obvious.
Yeah.
Here's I'm relating to you, and you appear as another object. But actually what I'm relating to in you isn't an object. It's awareness itself. And I can't see that, and I can't touch it. I know it's there, behind those shapes and forms, but where is it? It looks like it's in your head, but if I had a zip in your head and had a look inside and, could a magnifying glass, I'd never find it.
Okay.
It's not in there. So where is it? Well, I think what happens if you pay attention, you find it's the other way around. That awareness is the emptiness within which the forms are arising.
Okay.
So what we are isn't in the dream. What we are isn't in the story. What we are is this big empty presence. And once you let go of holding your identity to this limited thing and let it just, then that's the beginning of coming to this lucid living or gnosis.
Right, because you can, in essence, connect with everything else. You don't see it as separate from you.
Exactly. So it's kind of separate and not separate. Here we're definitely separate. As objects, we're different, that's the way it is.
Sure.
But here, we're not. And you see that our nature has this polarity to it. Now, that's kind of two and one at the same time, if you like. So, any polarity, left, right.
Like a dualism.
They're opposites, yes.
Yeah.
But they're not just opposites, because you can't have left without right. They're also one, yeah? And the same with our identities.
So you're saying there's an apparent contradiction on the surface, but if you go beyond, there's a oneness.
The two coexist in the moment. And the secret to finding them, and this is what my little Lucid Living book is about, and also the second half of The Laughing Jesus, and it's what I run my seminars on and take people through, is it's just about looking now, and if you and freeing yourself from your suppositions, putting everything on hold, stepping out of the story into the mystery is the way that Jesus puts it in the Second Coming.
Yeah.
He constantly wants you to come out, and as you come out into the mystery, because I don't know about you, Mark, but
sure.
Most people, and I include myself, we go about our daily life, again, lost in a story of ourselves and what life is. But if if something happens to wake you up from that, if you face death or you fall in love or just anything which wakes you up, most people have had that moment where suddenly they see the reality, and the reality is this breathtaking mystery of existence. That we are, that this is just an awesome mystery.
Well, and this is the thing, is that usually when people get that, a flash of insight, it's so quick, they don't know what to make of it. And again, how do you somehow quantify a mysterious experience? To a lot of, if you explain that to other people, they might think that you've lost it or something like that. So again, you know, what would be, in terms of somebody watching this, somebody that's inspired by your books or by these ideas, what would maybe you want them to come away with in just a very simple way? Because again, I think, you know, there's a lot of hope for people in terms of their own, you know, awakening and these kinds of things. But what would you just say to somebody, regardless of their background, if they're, you know, feeling something like this and they don't know, you know, essentially how to embrace it in a personal way? What would maybe be your last piece of advice for them?
Well, you know, I don't seem cute, but really that's why I've written the books.
Yeah.
Because the little book does it real quick, and the bigger books, you know, do it in more detail, because everybody's coming at it from a different angle. So the universal message has to be more general, and the universal message, for me, is look, this moment is far, far more mysterious than our ideas about it can possibly grasp.
Mm-hmm.
There is a state of waking up in which you can know for yourself what you are directly, and it's an experience of that I would describe as oneness and love, and it brings life to life. It means it's not a kind of detached, disembodied thing. It actually brings you into life. You actually start feeling, my God, I'm actually here. How amazing.
Right, and it's not separate from regular everyday life.
Far from it. What it does is makes you see how every moment is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And you lose that numbness that we call normal. I call it enlivenment, really, rather than enlightenment.
Okay.
I don't like that word. It sounds like to get enlightened, you've got to live in a cave and have a nander at the end of your name.
Right, and pull yourself out of regular
and be
life.
out.
Yeah.
Whereas this is very much of seeing you're in the world but not of it at
Mm-hmm.
the same time.
Yeah.
You're in the story, but you're also not in the story. And the combination of those two together is what brings this to life. And my real message is, look, this is natural. This isn't religious, it isn't really spiritual, it's just about seeing what we are and finding ways to approach it which are direct and which don't lead us down. The truth is, Mark, when I wrote my little Lucid Living book,
Okay.
I realized later I'd written the book I wish someone had put in my hands when I was 12.
Ah, really?
Because
Okay.
it would have saved me decades of wandering around these kind of spiritual labyrinths,
Right.
trying to make sense of it all.
But at the same time, though, when you do that, you make it yours. So there's two ways to look at that, because...
You do, and that's
Yeah.
important, but so much of it is really just about trying to wade through our past.
Mm-hmm.
And the simplicity that I saw when I was a kid and didn't understand is the simplicity I've returned to now as a middle-aged man.
Mm-hmm.
And the journey there has been great to me in my life. I loved it.
Sure.
But I'm not sure that it's essential. I think people can go straight there. And, we're all offering whatever we've got in life.
Mm-hmm.
And what I hope I can offer people as a philosopher is a shortcut from a lot of the dead ends, so that they can see, we don't need to get stuck in religion, definitely. We don't really need to get to, this whole spiritual thing can become another thing you get caught up in.
Yeah.
What we're looking for is a direct realization of who we are and what this is, and that is just available to us if we pay attention.
Fair enough. Well, thank you very much for being here.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delight to have such a real conversation.
Well, thank you. And thanks for being with us. We'll see you again soon.